Hi, welcome to this screencast. I'm going to be showcasing the new Callbacks debugger version 3.0. We just released this today, and I'm very excited to give you a 20,000-foot view of what the Callbacks debugger is, how do you install it, how do you configure it, and how do you work with it. You can find it in GitHub, of course, in our Callbacks modules organization under CB Debugger, and of course in ForgeBox. So if you go to forgebox.io, view CB Debugger, you will also see the homepage for the debugger right here. Okay. Now, what is the Callbacks debugger? So the Callbacks debugger is a module that will enhance any Cobox application with performance monitoring and profiling tools. Okay. It has two modes of operation. It has a request tracker that will dock itself to the bottom of a request if you are producing HTML content. And it has a standalone debugger request visualizer that can be used to track all the incoming requests into your Cobox application and present a nice UI for you to actually track, monitor, and profile everything that is happening within your Cobox application. Okay, so within the GitHub organization, you can find all of its different capabilities, and we're going to go through most of them today. How to configure it. It's highly configurable. It's highly extensible as well. So you can actually extend it to track anything within your application or create even more panels through events and so forth. Okay, so lots of documentation that we've provided for the module itself. To get started, it is incredibly easy. Using command box in the root of your application, you will just say install CB Debugger, and that is it. That will install the debugger module into Cobox, and if you reinit your application, right, you will get the debugger. This is an application for our tests, so you can actually see all of its capabilities. Right now, there is no debugger turned on. Okay. By default, if I just enable it and reinit my app, I will get the default values. Okay, I will get the default debugger just at the bottom of the screen, as you can see here, and that's about it. Right. If you want to start actually customizing it, I recommend, which you do, is to take all the configuration settings and open your config callbox.cfc under your module settings, and then basically paste all the different settings that are available to you. And then you can go one by one and actually determine what is the best case scenario for your application and tracking. I recommend that you do not turn everything on the first shot because obviously it is a profiler, so it is going to take some time from your application. We've done several tests, and it is very lightweight, but obviously the more things you add, the more things can slow down. So let's go through the settings first, and then let's go through the capabilities. So you have a master on-off switch right here in the CB debugger, so you can turn the debugger completely off or completely on. Okay. Now we have created in version 3 the ability for you to have your debugger UI completely turned off and the debugger still tracking information for you. Okay, so this is very different than the previous version where you had to be in debug mode in order to track things. Now the tracker is actually asynchronous, and it will track everything in your application, and then when you want to show the UI, you can go into it. So here is the control flag for the debug mode. So I'm enabled it by default because I am in a development environment. Okay, you can also attach a password to it if you wanted to. So you can actually turn this on in production if you needed to, according to your password. And then we have different sections or collectors that you can actually work with in the debugger. And it will actually create many panels for you for tracking your application. The request tracker will track anything that comes into your application, whether it's an API request, a SOAP request, anything that comes into your Cobox app, it is tracked. All the trackers are stored in Cashbox. So if you have a distributed cache, that's even better because it will track a multi-instance or multi-container application for you. You can choose the cache name of where you want the destination of these JSON packets to be stored. You can track the debugger events itself. This is actually useful because when I was building this, I can actually track myself and actually see how fast or how slow the debugger is. Obviously, don't recommend you turn it on unless you want to work with the debugger itself. You can choose for these panels to be expanded or collapsed. The default is just to get you out of the way. It'll give you the information as you see here. A get operation was made to this event. The status code was 200, and it took 2 seconds or 2049 milliseconds for it to execute this request. you can change for this to be expanded all the time, and it will give you that panel all the time at the bottom of the screen. So by default, it is collapsed. Okay. Then you can turn execution thresholds for things to come up as red and catch your attention, depending on the execution time that you want. How many profilers you want to keep in memory in your caches. You can be 25, 50, 100, 500, whatever you want. We have the capability to profile the creation of objects in Wirebox, and we're going to go through that. Also, the ability to profile objects a la carte, object results, interceptions, okay? Execution timers, so what you're seeing here is very dedicated timers of things that are happening or special events in ColdBox, okay, or your application. We have a ColdBox information panel, an HTTP request information panel, a tracers panel, which we'll go in depth, the collections, so this is how the request collections for ColdBox ended up, okay, Cashbox, modularity, QB, and CBORM. So these are the collectors that are built on top of the debugger for you, okay, and you can start enabling all of them. So you can see that the CBORM right now is enabled, QB is enabled, modules are enabled, Cashbox is enabled. We actually created a new one, which is called the Async Manager. So I'm going to enable it as well. So enabled, true, expanded, false. Okay. So I'm going to enable the Async Manager as well. And the collections, let's enable it as well so you can actually see what I mean by collections. Okay. And I think everything else is turned on. Let me see here. I'll turn on the profiling of the objects in the Wirebox creation in a minute so you can see how it tracks. But let's reunit here again so we can see all the different panels as they appear. Okay. Now that we've configured it, so now you'll see that we have 4 panels at the end of the request. It tells you how long the rendering for those panels take. Okay, obviously the more it takes. You have the request tracker panel right here. You have the ColdBox modules panel, the Async Manager panel, and of course Cashbox. So let's go one by one. Here's the request tracker. You can see the actual CFM engine that you're running, the Java JDK that you're running, the environment that you're running on, and the application that you're on, okay? The version of ColdBox. You have a few controls here. You can open the Debugger Visualizer from here, which we'll go through. We can reinit the ColdBox application through here or completely turn off the debugger if you wanted to, okay? Here is the request tracking for this specific request I just made. It gave me a status code of 200 using a get and the actual operation that you see that it tracked, the actual event in ColdBox that it executed, and some statistics about the actual execution, right? The timestamp, which IP address actually made that request, on which server, right? Which thread and which thread group actually executed this request. If we're in Docker, it'll give you the machine IP and, of course, the response content type and how long it took, okay? Then we get into the panels inside of this request to figure out what happened. Okay, so we see that we have 18 execution timers. Okay, so we can see that from the pre-process to the post-process, it took 2.3 seconds. Okay, then inside of that pre-process, we have a main index event execution. We have several interceptions, so you can see that we're actually tracking ORM. Okay, so we have ORM loaded. You can actually even tell which ORM object is being intercepted. Okay, you see a main on app init that fired as well. Okay. And you see pretty much everything that happens, okay? Rendering, pre-rendering, everything inside this request will be profiled for you so you can pinpoint slowdowns or anything that's happening within the ColdBox environment of your application, okay? Let's go down the road here and we go to ColdBox event information. This is actually what actually got executed. This will tell you the event, it was cached or not, the layout, if it was up from a module, the route metadata, everything that you need to determine what happened in this request. Then we get into the HTTP request, okay? So this actually takes a snapshot of everything coming in from the HTTP request to give you an idea of what's going on. From 4 parameters to headers to, you know, all the cookies, anything that you might need will be available to you in this request, okay? Now we can go down further into the actual tracer messages. So the tracer messages is basically logbox that's giving you the ability to see everything inside of the request, okay, for logbox. So you no longer have to go to log files or anything of that nature. You can actually see it right here in your debugger. Everything that was going to go into logbox is now intercepted, okay? That's the tracer messages. Then you have the Cobox request structures. This was how the actual request structures ended up at the end of the request. I recommend that you do not turn this on by default because it does keep a lot of tracking information. So I would say if you need to debug the request structures, then activate it. Okay? Then we get into the fun stuff, which is ORM tracking and QB tracking and things of that nature. Okay? So CBORM, okay, we have completely created hooks so you can tap into Hibernate and all the goodness of criteria queries. So you can see here that it keeps track in either a grouped or a timeline format of all the executions that happen from the beginning of the request to the end of the request for CBORM or Hibernate. Okay, you can see how many times a specific SQL was executed. Okay, and you can have the breakdown of that SQL. You can see the total queries and the total execution time in Hibernate, which was 61 milliseconds. Also, at the end, we have the Hibernate session statistics of giving you how many entities were loaded in this request, how many collections were loaded, and of course, the total execution time on queries again. Now, this is very useful, so you can see everything that happened within CBORM. Okay? I can look at this specific SQL, for example, and I can copy it right here and paste it and run it in my SQL. You can also bind the parameters, so you can see you have configurations where I can actually see the parameters that were sent into the database and also copy them if needed. Okay? The cool thing that we've added is that we can also let you know where in your application this actually happened. So we keep a stack of where it happened, and I can actually open it right here into VS Code, okay? And that's the line of code that actually executed that piece of SQL, okay? I can keep going further and say, okay, where did this came from? Okay, let's go here, and it's right here, okay? That is the count that was executed. So we've made several insights into your application that can pinpoint to the line of code where the SQL comes from or where the slowdowns come from, and link you into VS Code or whatever editor of your choice. Okay? That's the CBORM panel. Okay? We also have the Quick panel. So if you use Quick ORM or QB, okay, you will also get the same effect. Okay? You can also bind the parameters, okay, and choose to log the parameters as well. And the same thing, you can actually see from where they were executed, okay, and you can actually debug them as you see fit. So very nicely, you have the capabilities for introspecting everything that's happening within that request for Hibernate and Quick. Okay? So that's the actual request tracker. Okay? If you close the request tracker, we have more global information here, such as the Cobox modules. So here, we can actually tell you all the different modules that got loaded in this application. Okay? And if you're running the latest Callbacks 6, you're actually going to get registration times and activation times. Okay? I actually need to update my test harness here. But once that is there, you will actually see those statistics and you will see total registration time and total activation time for all modules. And then you can traverse all the modules and see the child modules and see which modules loaded which modules, which loaded which modules, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And this will give you a nice introspection of all the modularity that you've built into your application and how it's performing. We also have the Coldbox Async Manager. So this is, if you're running Callbacks 6, it will tell you how many executors have been actually registered within this application and give you statistics about each of the executors, okay, how they're configured, how many tasks they're running, how many scheduled tasks are inside of them, and how many are completed, and actually even get a report of all the tasks that are running inside of it and their periodic delays. Okay? So deep insight into all the asynchronous threads that are registered into the Cobox application can be visualized right here. Okay? And then finally, you have the Cashbox Monitor, which tells you all the deep insight into the caching engines. Remember, Cashbox can talk to any cache engine. Okay? It has one by default that we've built. We call the Cashbox ColdBox provider, but you can also tie this to Redis. You can tie this to Mongo. You can tie this to Elastic Cache. Any cache that we have built most likely is available for Cashbox. You can see the JVM, how it's performing, if it's a heap, okay? Or the cache performance report, if it's being reported by each of those caches. You have the different areas of the cache that you can also get. As you can see here, you can see, of course, here's our module tester and everything inside of our Cashbox. Okay? All right, so that's an overview of all the different things that are tracking inside of our execution. Okay? Now, let's activate a few more things here so you can see them. So let's track the creation of objects, and you can actually track objects. So what does this mean? So the tracking of objects allows you to go into your application and go into any method, okay, and annotate them with the profile annotation. If you tag them with a profile annotation, which can be at the method or at the component level, then any method inside of this component will be profiled for you and it'll appear in the actual tracker. So if we actually renit now that we've activated these trackers, okay, we can see that we still get a bunch of stuff here. And now in our timers, okay, we're gonna get a little bit more information. So actually, let me come in here and let me disable a few things again. Oops, I was in the wrong configuration actually. So let's go in here and say profile true, profile objects true. Okay, we're not going to trace the results. I'm not going to profile interceptions right now, so you don't have to get all that noise. And we're going to turn off these collections, and I'm going to turn off the modules so you can see, and Cashbox, so we can make it light and snappy as we want. Now that we can reinit, now this is our application configuration. There you go, no more modules. We have our code here, and we can see that there are 31 debug timers because now it is tracking all the creation of those objects and telling you how long it takes to create those objects. Okay, so this is very important. So you can actually start looking at this and saying, okay, why are my objects taking, for example, the log object is taking 174 milliseconds. What's going on? And let's go investigate, right? Then you can also see here the object profile. This was the method that we actually tagged with a profile annotation, and it's actually taking quite a few, milliseconds. So what is going on, right? So this is a great way for you to actually start adding all these timers into your application, and it will profile them for you. Now you can also be using this a la carte with our mixins. So we provided several mixins here for timers. So you can actually start timers, stop timers, or use our time it closure. So you can actually execute a closure and it will time it for you, and all that information will go here. Okay. You also have a tracer, which we lovingly call the CB tracer, and that will also go here into the ColdBox tracer messages. Okay. So you have all the capabilities for you to be able to profile and debug your ColdBox application with a nice little panel to investigate everything that's going on in your app. Now the cool thing is that if we go into our application and let's start executing a few more things. Let's go to a main node debugger. I have another event here. I have an error actually. So here's an exception that happened with our whoops table, right? And we can go back into our main request, okay? And let's open now the actual visualizer. So if I click on the visualizer, now I get into the ColdBox Debugger Visualizer. This tracks all the requests into my application. As you can see, it's tracking them all in chronological order. Okay, you can see all the server information, the response. Even if it was an exception, it'll let you know which one was an exception. Okay, and the timer for all of these. Okay, so I can actually go back in time and say, okay, let's look at this exception. Let's open the exception. And now it actually tracked the exception for me. And you can see the stack trace of the exception, okay, that happened at that point in time. Okay, it also gives me the tag context with the code print, so I can actually see exactly what happened, and I can say, okay, I know what the error is, so let's open it in VS Code and fix it. Okay, so now I can fix that exception. Right, so we keep track of that exception tag context, and then you can go and traverse, see, as the request went through your application, and tie it into your editor really, really nicely. Okay, so that's the exception data. It also kept track of the execution timers up to the point of the exception. Okay, the Cobox information as it was intercepted, the request as usual, as we saw, even tracer messages that were tracked up to the point of exceptions, and any actual ORMs information that actually happened during the request. So very nicely, I can go back and say, okay, what other messages do I see here? Okay, I want to see this guy, and can go into that node debugger. Okay, just a few things happened on that request. It took about 200 milliseconds, right? You can actually pull and say, okay, I want to pull my application and see every 3 seconds. I want to be able to get information. Okay, so every 3 seconds, you'll see another one pop up because I just made another request into my application. And very nicely, if you have an API or a very complicated Ajax application, or even a SOAP application that's tied into ColdBox, you're going to get all the different tracking of all the different events that are happening within ColdBox, and you can actually intercept them and go through them and see exactly what's going on, debug it, fix issues, and move along. Okay. All right. So this is a 20,000 foot view, very, very quickly, of the ColdBox debugger. Like I said, very easily to configure. Just drop in tons of configurations. You can start mixing and matching all the different options. But at the end of the day, this is essential for not only debugging your applications, but also adding a focus on performance. I can tell you that when I was building this is what I'm building right now, Content Box 5, and the majority of the performance optimizations have happened because of this in combination with Fusion Reactor and their very line deep CFML profiler. This has been a tremendous tool for us to work and perform on performance for all of our applications. I really recommend that you get it started, try it out, and enjoy it. Thank you.